Hi everyone, it's Clive. Happy brew day. It's another lovely day in Nottingham, and I'm going to be making an American style IPA called August IPA, which you've probably never heard of because I've just made it up. I'm going to be using the remainder of the ingredients in the Mitchell Brewery store cupboard. So I've got lager malt, Perle malt, crystal, got torrefied wheat, Caramalt, roasted barley, and hops. I've got Willamette, Cascade, Perle and Centennial, and I basically made up an American style IPA recipe, drawing on the recipes in the Clone Brews book by Tessa Mark Zamatolsky, and hopefully it's going to be a good one. Cheers, happy brewing! As you can see, I'm going to be using largely lager malt. It's going to fill most of the grain bill for this particular beer, so I'm using 2.5 kilograms of lager malt, so lovely lager malt, which will go into the mash tun, along with, let's think, what have I got? 750 grams of Perle malt. I'm going to be using 273 grams of crystal malt. I'm going to be using 184 grams of the Caramalt here. I'm going to be using 248 grams of the torrefied wheat and 45 grams of roasted barley, just to give it a little bit of colour. And that's 4 kilograms of malt in total. 4 kilograms of grain has been placed into the mash tun. I'm now going to add 9 litres of boiled and cooled water. This is my boiler. It's a Brewpax boiler, electric boiler, 2 kilowatts, and I put this on early today and took about an hour and a half to boil up about 25 litres of water from 20 degrees C, and then I let it cool down to less than 80 degrees C. Here we go. This is the second addition of 2 litres into the mash tun, and I just pour it in like that, making sure that all the grain is submerged. Now, one of the most important things in brewing is to make sure that everything is scrupulously clean and that no bugs get into your beer and spoil your beer. Boiling is an extremely effective way of eliminating all bugs. So at this stage of the brewing process, don't worry too much, because the boiling later stages with the hops will kill anything that you think may have got in. That's all 9 litres of water added. I'm just going to give this a pretty quick stir now to make sure that there are no pockets of air or dry malt at the bottom of the mash tun, because the whole point of this exercise is to ensure that any sugars in the malt are dissolved into the water, because it's that water which, when it comes out of the tap here, has been turned into sweet wort. That sugar, as you all know, is the basis for your beer's alcohol content. The more sugar, the more alcohol. So you want to make sure that you maximise the sugar recovery from the malt. All nicely stirred. Now we'll get the lid on to make sure that the lid is on the mash tun, and then sealed over. And I've made this sort of insulated cover to put over my mash tun to try and make sure that none of the heat escapes unnecessarily. So I shall pull that cover over. There we go. Right, so that will be now tucked up for an hour and a half to let the water do its job and dissolve the sugar. We'll come back to it then. Just because we've got an hour and a half doesn't mean you can go and have a lie down in a dark room. We've got to fill the boiler back up again, get it to boiling, let it cool down, because that boiling cooled water will be your sparge water, which will then wash through the mash tun to remove any remaining sugars. While I'm waiting for the mash tun, I'm going to get the yeast on to hydrate. I've got 110 mils of boiled water, which I'm going to let to cool to less than 30. Then I'll add this Nottingham yeast. Well, I live in Nottingham, so that's fairly appropriate. And I'll show you later how that gets on. Water is cooled to about 26, and I'm just about to add the yeast. You can see what it looks like in there. It's sort of like a powdery, granular type stuff. All I do at this stage is just add the yeast and then leave it for 15 minutes, and then I'll give it a bit of a stir and then let it hydrate. This is what I use for sparging. I've got a drive clip at the end of a plastic pipe connected to the fine rose from a watering can. That will then go on the end of the tap. This water's cooled nearly less than 80, and the mash tun's got about a few minutes before it's finished its hour and a half. The water is boiled and cooled to less than 80. I've got my sparging device ready. Let's just reveal the mash tun. Let's have a look and see how we're doing in this mash tun. There we go. Let's just take off the insulating cover. Get rid of that. This is, ladies and gents, one of my most favourite parts. It's the reveal. Oh, that's absolutely glorious. Malty smell, and hopefully this has done its job. What we do now is we will run off a bit of the malt just to see how we're doing. Let's get the mash tun over the edge and then pour a bit of the malt off. And the reason we do this is that this first flush of solution, it usually contains lots of bits, and those fine bits, if I tip it back in here, this bed of malt will capture those particles like a filter bed and hopefully help to clarify the wort. Let's start the sparging. So turn the tap on. You know that the water coming through there, and you just play it backwards and forwards across the bed, and then we turn the tap on, and then hopefully we'll get a balance between fresh boiled water coming in and sweet wort, which is the sugar laden solution, into this container. This will take a little while to drain all this through here, and I will have to swap to another container midway. Here we go. It's taken about 40 minutes to sparge that quantity, so about 25 litres, through the mash tun and into these containers, and I've got roughly 30 litres or so of sweet wort, and I'm going to put this one, this is the first one, the most concentrated one, into the boiler. You do actually lose by evaporation, so this second one will be my top up as we go along. Before I put the sweet wort into the boiler, I think I better give the heating element in here a bit of a clean. Can you see? It's got a bit of residue on it, and what happens is it's sugary residue from wort, and it builds up to the point where it cuts out, so I need to clean that off. The sweet wort has been put into the boiler. At this point it's about 57 degrees centigrade, and this is got to get back up to boiling before we add the hops. This is a thing that happens occasionally. The boiler cuts out because the heating element gets coated in sugar mid-boil. Great, not mid-boil, but getting up to temperature. So the only thing to do is empty it out, clean the element and stick it all back together, and that'll probably delay me another half an hour, I reckon. Just cleaning out the mash tun, here we go. We've got a lot of spent grain here. I'm hoping the chickens next door will dig into this stuff. The sweet wort is now at 100 and ready for the hop addition, and I'm adding 20 grams of Centennial and 20 grams of Cascade. You can smell the phenolic goodness, the resiny goodness of the Centennial. Fantastic. Here we go, first addition of hops. The hop boil, wow, one of my other favourite points during the brewing process. Start to form the sweet wort into bitter wort. This is the very beginning of the boil, so this will have an hour and a half with these hops to draw out the bitterness, and then we'll be adding other hops to add the flavour and the aroma, but later in the boil, because if you leave the flavour and the aroma hops in too long, all that goodness is evaporated. The yeast is pretty fully hydrated now, so I think it's got quite a warm August day. The yeast is a bit lively and it's overflowed a little bit, but that'll be ready to pitch into the bitter wort and ready later. Time to get the copper chiller out and into the boiler to sterilise. This copper coil is connected to some pipes, some tubes which connect to the outside tap. I will pop this into, there we go, into the boiler like that, and that ensures that as it's boiling, the copper itself is sterilised. Obviously, when this is completed boiling, this chiller will cool this volume of water down in about 10 or 15 minutes. It's pretty miraculous. Oh, it smells like a brewery in here. Fantastic. Time for the second hop addition. I'm adding 24 grams of Perle and I'll be adding 25 grams of Willamette. Here we go. Oh, fantastic, glorious smell. So this addition is within 15 minutes of the end of the hop boil, and then there'll be a third addition within 1 minute of the hot boil ending. Okay, that's it, boiler off and the chiller on. Now the chiller, this is connected to the outside tap. It goes to the bottom of this coil and the water goes round and round and out the top. So we'll see what temperature it comes out at the other end. The water going in is about 21 degrees. Let's see what happens when we turn on this. Just double check there's nothing gone awry in here when we turn on the water. The last thing I want is one of these things to suddenly pop off. Yeah, that water is coming out at about 44. It's taken about 20 minutes for the chiller to cool the bitter wort down to less than 30, so time to turn off and get decanting into primary fermentation. Now I just turn this tap and transfer the bitter wort into the primary fermentation container. Okay, well I got 22.5 litres out of that 30 litres of original sweet wort, and this is the final resting place. I'm just about to pitch the yeast into the bitter wort. Here we go, this is the hydrated yeast. Give it a bit of a swish round. There we go. I'll seal that up, and this time I'm going to be dry hopping, so I'm going to seal it up for 3 days, and then I'm going to add the dry hops and leave it for another 4 days until next Sunday. This is the Nelson Sauvin hops, which I'm going to add to the primary fermentation bin. This is the dry hopping stage. These dry hops will be kept in here now for about 3 or 4 days, and hopefully we'll add some lovely flavours to the beer. 6 days after the August IPA bitter wort went into the primary fermentation bin with the yeast, it's ready to be decanted into the pressure barrel. I've already added some beer finings. I've added 71 grams of brewing sugar to the pressure barrel as well, and I've got 37 bottles ready to be filled up. What I do is I put this into here, then I decant into here, and there's usually a little bit left in here, but it's normally the bottles that I use for drinking. This strange lump in the beer is the muslin bag with the Nelson Sauvin hops that I've added for dry hopping, so that's been in there a couple of days, and hopefully that should add some nice extra flavour to the beer. This is the siphon, and I'll lower this end into the inside of the barrel down to the bottom, and then the beer is drawn out through that tube into the pressure barrel. You can see the beer being drawn out. You can just about make out the bottom of the siphon, and the beer is just being drawn out into the pressure barrel. That's 37 bottles thoroughly sterilised. I use this stuff. If it's good enough for babies, it's good enough for beer, as I always say. So they've been soaking in a solution of Milton's, and then I wash them out, fill them up with cold water, empty them out twice to make sure that they're perfectly clean and all the sterilising solution is removed. Next job, I put a tip of a teaspoon into each bottle, and then I top them up with the beer that's waiting now in the pressure barrel. So here we go, tip of a teaspoon. So this is what I normally do, about this much. Just and then work my way down, and when I've done that row I basically make sure that each one is just got the lid loosely back on the top again, just to minimise the amount of time it's exposed to the atmosphere. I know there's probably a better way of doing this, but this is what I normally use for filling up my beer barrels. I've put a little bit of beer in the bottom of the jug just to make sure that if there is any contamination, it's the only thing contaminating it is the beer itself. So I just swish it round and dump that bit and fill it up, and then fill the bottles up. That's all 37 bottles all safely tucked up, and we've got a little bit left in the pressure barrel at the bottom there, and hopefully that'll brew nicely as well. Cheers everyone, that's the end of the August IPA video. Cheers, happy brewing.